So if you are not the type of person that gets to wake up to a nice fresh pot of coffee that was brewed for you by somebody else and you got to do it yourself, well, this video is for you. I'm going to give you some tips and tricks for how to brew better coffee at home using this equipment. So some of the basics for brewing better coffee is having good water, having a good grinder, and having the correct ratio of coffee to water. So once we get all those things dialed in, the coffee should taste good. So this brewer that we're using today is a Bonavita brewer. These are simple, easy to use, and they produce really good results. They run for about $150. It's an 8-cup brewer. It takes about 8 minutes to brew that much coffee. And the spray head for dispersing the water over the coffee grinds is really good at saturating all the coffee. The other nice thing I really like about this brewer is it uses a flatbed filter, and those are readily available at any grocery store you shop at. They're cheap and easy to use. So that's the brewer we're using today. The grinder we're using is from a brand called Baratza, and this is the Encore. It's their entry-level grinder. It runs for $140, and it's a Burr grinder. It's going to give you really nice, even grind distribution. So if you're grinding fine, it's going to be pretty evenly fine. If you're grinding coarse, you're not going to have too many fines in that coarseness level. The other equipment is a scale. So a scale allows us to measure how much coffee to use for how much water we're using. So it makes it nice and consistent time after time. If you do not have a scale, a good rule of thumb that I recommend is 1 heaping tablespoon of coffee for every cup on your brewer. So if you're doing 8-cup brew, do 8 heaping spoonfuls of coffee. Now that's going to vary a bit depending on how big you scoop or what type of coffee you're using. So I would recommend getting a scale. Okay, so how much coffee to water am I using today? We talk in ratios. So 1 to 16 is a good rule of thumb. 1 part coffee to 16 parts water. But for a brew this big on this brewer, I'm actually going to be using a 1 to 18 ratio. So when I measured how much water is going into this brewer, when I fill it up to the 8-cup line, it was a little over a liter. So it was about 1,300 grams of water when I weighed it. A liter would be 1,000 grams. So when I divide that by 18, that gives me 70 grams of coffee is how much coffee I decided to use. And I used a few different grind settings, and I landed on 25 on the Encore as my setting that I went with. And I did that off of taste. It tasted good. It's kind of a coarser setting, and I would not recommend going too fine with a batch this big. You're going to get channeling that occurs in the brew bed, which means some pockets aren't going to get saturated. But when you grind coarse enough and with an 8-minute brew, it gives the coffee plenty of time to extract and get saturated. I also landed on that ratio of 70 grams of coffee for the 8-cup mark and a 1 to 18 ratio based off of our equipment that we have. So we're able to measure total dissolved solids with this fancy device here. It's called a TDS meter. And coffee is 98 to 99% water. So that other 1 to 2% is dissolved solids. So now if you're sipping on a coffee that tastes really weak, it might be 1% coffee or 0.8% dissolved solids. That's going to be a weak coffee. So we want to make sure that the TDS is above 1. The window that I really prefer is between like 1.2 and 1.5. Anything above 1.5 is starting to taste pretty strong. So when I brewed this, 70 grams of coffee, the 8-cup mark, ground at 25, the TDS came out to 1.25. And when you do the math on that, there's a fancy app that they have. The extraction percentage of the coffee was 21.5%, which is right in the window that we're looking for. We want to be extracting 18 to 22% of the coffee. So if you use those kind of guidelines for ratio, then you should be at a pretty good spot. You're just gonna have to get the grind setting dialed in for your grinder. The other factor I mentioned was water. So if you're not sure if your water's good for brewing coffee at home, a couple of things to think about. If you don't drink your water because it doesn't taste good, you shouldn't be using it to brew coffee. If that's you, I would highly recommend checking out Third Wave Water. They sell these cool little mineral supplements. You take one of these packets, you throw it in a gallon of distilled water, like I have here, and then you shake it up, and then that is perfect water for coffee. That's what these are designed for. It's the perfect mix of minerals to extract coffee to taste phenomenal. So this setup is very convenient, very easy, and I hope that these tips that I just gave you help you to enjoy better coffee at home.